The Millionaire CEO sat through a charity concert out of politeness, until two little girls stepped on stage and sang a song that shattered his entire past. The room buzzed with soft music, clinking glasses, and the polite laughter of donors who had come to show face more than heart. Adam Rivers stood near the back of the grand ballroom, a glass of untouched champagne in his hand, already calculating how soon he could leave without being noticed. These charity events were rarely about the cause and more about appearances. He had donated generously, more than anyone else in the room, but he didn't care for praise or mingling. His light brown hair was neatly styled, his tailored black suit flawless, and his deep brown eyes scanned the room with mild detachment. He was here out of obligation, nothing more. He was just about to turn away from the stage and make a quiet exit when the host stepped up to the microphone and announced a special performance. Two young sisters were going to sing, the host said, in support of children's medical needs. It barely registered for Adam, just background noise. But when the spotlight hit the stage and two little girls walked out hand in hand, something inside him jolted. They couldn't have been more than 6 years old. They wore matching white dresses, and their long brown hair curled softly around their faces. Their eyes, warm, wide, and so painfully familiar, seemed to pierce right through him. As the music began and they started to sing, Adam remained still, completely unaware of the rest of the room. The girls had a natural harmony, their voices clear and sweet, innocent but strong. The crowd around him softened, and some even wiped away tears, but Adam could only focus on one thing. Their faces. The shape of their eyes, the tilt of their chin, the way one of them tapped her foot slightly offbeat, all of it was unmistakably connected to something, or rather someone, in his past. He leaned slightly forward, as if closing the distance between himself and a truth he hadn't yet accepted. And that's when he saw her. Off to the side of the stage, standing alone, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, was a woman with familiar posture and a face he hadn't seen in 6 years. Her hair was longer now, darker, her expression more tired, but he'd recognize her anywhere. Cassie. The woman who had vanished from his life without warning or explanation. The woman who had once meant everything. His mind tried to piece together what he was seeing, but his body was already reacting. His heart pounded. He couldn't breathe. The girls on the stage, singing like little stars, were not just any performers. They were hers. And if his instincts were right, if the echo of his own features in their faces meant anything, they were his too. He didn't wait for applause. As soon as the final note ended and the audience erupted in claps, he turned and walked quickly out of the ballroom, his thoughts racing, his stomach in knots. The past he thought was buried had just walked out onto a stage and looked him straight in the eye. And nothing in his life, no deal, no title, no empire, could have prepared him for that moment. Adam stood alone in the corridor just outside the ballroom, his pulse still racing. He braced his hands on the marble-topped drinks table, trying to ground himself as the realization continued to hit in crashing waves. Those girls hadn't just looked like him, they were him. Reflections of his features in smaller, brighter, more innocent forms. And Cassie. Her presence confirmed everything. He hadn't seen her since the week she left, the same week she ended their relationship without a reason, without a word. No calls, no texts, no closure. One day she had simply vanished from his life, and despite all his influence and connections, she stayed hidden. And now, suddenly, she was here, and she wasn't alone. For a moment he considered leaving. It would be easier. Cleaner. But something in him refused. He had spent his life walking away from complications, turning emotion into logic and pain into silence. But not this time. He couldn't walk away from what he had seen on that stage. He didn't even want to. Without hesitation, he made his way back toward the ballroom doors and waited just outside, hidden in the shadows, until the crowd thinned and the girls disappeared backstage. Minutes later, he saw her emerge, ushering the girls toward the exit with a protective hand on each of their small backs. Cassie was thinner than he remembered, her face more drawn, and she moved with a quiet urgency, the way people do when they've lived too long in survival mode. But she still had that same grace, that quiet strength that had first drawn him to her years ago. As she stepped closer, he saw her freeze the moment their eyes met. The girls didn't notice. They skipped ahead, chatting to each other about cookies and glitter. Cassie didn't speak at first. Her lips parted slightly, as if her breath had been stolen, and her eyes widened in disbelief. Adam walked slowly toward her until there was only a few feet between them. For a moment they just stared at each other, the air between them so thick neither could breathe. "You left," he said, his voice low and controlled, but trembling just beneath the surface. "You disappeared without a word. And now I find you here. With them." He didn't look toward the girls. He couldn't. It would break him. Cassie swallowed hard. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again." Her voice was soft but steady. "I didn't know how to tell you. Are they mine?" The words felt foreign in his mouth, like they belonged to someone else. She looked down. "Yes." The answer didn't shock him. It only deepened the ache in his chest. "Why didn't you tell me, Cassie? Why would you keep them from me?" Her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and guilt. "Because you were building an empire, Adam. You had just closed your biggest acquisition. You were working 20-hour days. You told me there was no room for anything else. I believed you." She paused. "I was scared. I didn't want to be the one who distracted you. Or ruined what you had worked for." Adam shook his head slowly, his voice raw. "You didn't ruin anything. You took everything." Cassie stepped forward, just slightly, her voice quiet but clear. "One of them, Chloe, she's sick. She needs surgery. That's why we were here tonight. To raise enough to help her. I tried everything else." He stared at her in stunned silence. 1,000 emotions raced through him, anger, regret, helplessness. But beneath all of it was something stronger. Determination. "Where are you staying?" he asked. She hesitated. "A friend's place. Not far." "I want to see them," he said. "I want to know them." Cassie nodded slowly. "Okay. But go slow. They don't know anything." He looked toward the door where the girls had disappeared. "Then it's time they do." Cassie led Adam down a quiet residential street that curved away from the glow of the city, the air cool and still. They walked in silence, the sound of their shoes tapping against the pavement the only rhythm between them. Every few steps, Cassie would glance over her shoulder to make sure the girls were still ahead, skipping and laughing, unaware of the tension walking behind them. Adam kept his distance at first, unsure of what he was even allowed to feel, let alone say. His mind was running wild with questions, memories, and emotions that hadn't surfaced in years. Seeing Cassie again was like cracking open a time capsule that had been buried too deep. Seeing the girls, his daughters, was like meeting the future he'd never been told was his. They reached a modest house tucked behind a row of tall hedges. It wasn't fancy, but it looked lived in, cared for. Cassie opened the front door and let the girls rush inside. "Go wash up," she called after them. "We'll have tea before bed." The girls ran off, their giggles trailing down the hallway. The sound was like music and thunder in Adam's ears, sweet and deafening. Cassie stood in the small foyer, waiting for him to come inside. He hesitated at the threshold, as if afraid crossing it would make everything permanent. But he stepped forward. Inside, the house was warm, quiet, and full of traces of the life he had missed. Children's shoes near the door, drawings on the refrigerator, a half-built puzzle on the coffee table. It was all so intimate, so familiar and foreign at once. Cassie offered him tea, but he shook his head. He didn't want to pretend this was normal. "When did you find out Chloe was sick?" he asked, breaking the silence. She leaned against the kitchen doorway. "About a year ago." It started with shortness of breath, fatigue. We saw a cardiologist. It's a congenital defect. Fixable, but expensive. The kind of surgery that needs a specialist and a long recovery. She looked down at her hands. I couldn't afford it. The fundraiser tonight was a last try. He felt something shift in his chest, a slow building pressure that had nowhere to go. Why didn't you call me then? Not about us. Just about her. You knew I'd help. I didn't know that, she said honestly. I didn't know what you'd say after all this time. After everything I didn't say. Adam turned away, walked toward the hallway, his fingers brushing the edge of a framed drawing, 3 stick figures and a rainbow. His name wasn't written anywhere. Of course it wasn't. He wasn't part of this story. Not until now. Do they know about me? He asked. No, Cassie replied, quiet again. They know they have a father, but not who. I didn't lie, I just left out the details. I didn't want to fill their heads with someone who might not come back. Adam clenched his jaw. I'm not going anywhere now. Cassie didn't smile, didn't soften. I want to believe that. Just then, the girls came back into the room, now in pajamas, matching ones with little yellow stars. Chloe climbed up onto the couch with a picture book in hand, while Emma wandered over to Adam without hesitation. You were at our concert, she said matter-of-factly. I saw you looking at us. He lowered himself to her level. Yes. I was there. You both sang beautifully. She looked him over with narrowed eyes, curious, almost suspicious. Are you Mommy's friend? He hesitated. Cassie held her breath behind them. I'm hoping I can be your friend too, he said carefully. Emma considered that. Okay. But you'll have to learn the secret handshake. And Chloe has to like you first. He smiled for real then, something soft and unfamiliar on his face. Deal. Later, after tea and bedtime stories and reluctant goodnights, Adam stood in the hallway outside the girls' bedroom, watching their slow, even breathing. Chloe clutched a stuffed bear, Emma's hand dangled off the bed. He turned to Cassie, who stood beside him, arms folded, tired in a way only mothers are. You raised them well, he said. I did my best, she replied. You shouldn't have had to do it alone. She looked at him, unsure of what to say. I can't change the past, he said. But I want to be part of their future. Whatever that looks like. And for the first time that night, Cassie didn't pull away. She simply nodded. Then start by being here tomorrow. And he knew he would. The next morning came softly, sunlight spilling through the sheer curtains and painting the living room in warm gold. Adam had barely slept, spending most of the night on the small pull-out couch in Cassie's guest room, staring at the ceiling with thoughts that refused to quiet. For the first time in his life, he felt like the outsider in a world he desperately wanted to belong to. When he finally rose, the house was already awake. Laughter floated from the kitchen, along with the smell of pancakes and something sweet, maybe syrup or cinnamon. He followed the sound and found Cassie flipping pancakes with one hand while Emma sat at the table coloring, and Chloe stood beside her mother, watching the pan with serious concentration. It looked effortless, natural, like a life with routines he had never been part of. But the moment Emma saw him, her eyes lit up and she jumped down from her chair. You came back, she shouted, running to hug his legs. Adam bent down, surprised and grateful all at once. Of course I did, he said, smoothing her hair. I said I would. Chloe looked over, quieter, more hesitant. Her eyes lingered on him as if she were trying to figure out where he fit. Cassie handed her the spatula and came to stand next to him. She's slower to trust, she said under her breath. Always has been. Adam nodded. She doesn't have to trust me right away. She just needs to see that I'm not leaving. He helped set the table, and they all sat down to eat. It was awkward at first, Adam still unsure of how to move in this new space, but the girls didn't seem to care. Emma talked non-stop, between bites of pancake, about school, cartoons, and a friend who had a pet lizard. Chloe said less, but Adam noticed how she watched everything, especially him. She was observing, calculating, trying to make sense of who he was and why he was suddenly here. After breakfast, the girls went to get dressed while Cassie washed dishes. Adam dried them silently beside her, both of them aware of the strange rhythm they were beginning to fall into. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but sure. "You're really going to stay?" He nodded. "I am." "For how long?" "As long as they'll let me." "As long as you will." She didn't answer right away. "I'm not used to help. I've been on my own with them for so long, it's hard to let someone in." "I don't want to take anything away from what you've built," he said, placing a clean plate on the counter. "I just want to be part of it." They spent the rest of the day together, a strange kind of test run for something resembling a family. Adam joined the girls in a game of pretend, some combination of princess rescue and space mission, and found himself laughing, truly laughing, in a way that felt foreign and long overdue. When Chloe accidentally bumped into him and he caught her, she didn't pull away. She looked up at him and said quietly, "You don't feel like a stranger anymore." He felt something tighten in his chest at that. He didn't want to be a stranger. Not ever again. That night, after the girls were tucked in, Adam stood in the doorway watching them sleep. Cassie came up beside him, arms folded over her chest. "They've never had anyone else here," she said. "Not really. No one who stayed." He looked at her, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm staying." She looked up at him, not entirely convinced, but not pushing him away either. And for the first time, it didn't feel like he was borrowing someone else's life. It felt like he was beginning his own. The following days settled into a strange, tender rhythm that neither Adam nor Cassie had expected. Each morning, Adam would wake before the girls, sometimes helping Cassie with breakfast, other times simply watching her move through the kitchen with a comfort and grace he hadn't realized he missed. He began to learn small but significant things. Emma liked syrup on everything, Chloe only wore mismatched socks on purpose, and both girls insisted that pancakes tasted better if eaten while sitting on the floor. He didn't question any of it. He simply joined them, one moment at a time, folding himself into the life he had been absent from for far too long. Chloe remained cautious but no longer distant. She would ask him questions, not about the past, but about himself. What was his favorite animal? Did he like rainy days? Could he whistle? Every answer seemed to add a brick to the bridge she was building between them. One afternoon, she brought him one of her drawings, 3 stick figures under a tree, 2 small ones holding hands with a taller one in the middle. "This is us," she said shyly. "If you want it." He didn't say anything for a moment, afraid his voice would break. He simply nodded and said, "I do." Adam also began spending more time with Cassie, though never in a way that pressed or demanded. He respected the boundaries she had drawn, but he sensed they were beginning to shift. They talked late into the evenings after the girls went to sleep, sometimes about the future, sometimes about the years between them that had stretched like a silence neither knew how to fill. Cassie told him how hard it had been, how she had worked nights and skipped meals to make sure the girls had enough, how many times she had looked at her phone and almost called him. He listened without interrupting, letting her share what she had kept locked inside for so long. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the girls chase fireflies in the fading light, Cassie turned to him and said, "I never wanted to do it alone, Adam. I was just scared you wouldn't want this. Any of it." He didn't look away. "I didn't know what I wanted back then. I thought success was the only thing that mattered. But it's not. Not even close." Her eyes searched his, full of guarded hope. "You mean that?" "I mean every word," he replied. The next day, Adam took a call from the hospital while the girls played in the yard. The specialist had reviewed Chloe's case and recommended surgery soon. The timing was right, and thanks to Adam's connections and insistence, everything could be scheduled within the week. When he told Cassie, she was silent for a moment, tears filling her eyes. "You really did it," she said. "You saved her." "No," Adam replied, shaking his head. "You did. You fought for her. I'm just finally doing what I should have done from the beginning." They sat with the girls that evening and explained the surgery in gentle, careful words. Chloe nodded bravely, even though Adam could see the fear in her eyes. He took her hand and promised he would be there the entire time. She looked at him for a long moment before saying, "Okay. But only if you bring my bear too." That night, as Cassie tucked the girls into bed, Adam stood just outside their room listening to the lullabies and whispered goodnights. He felt like a stranger and a father all at once, carrying the weight of missed years alongside the hope of new ones. And when Cassie stepped into the hallway and met his gaze, he saw it in her eyes, something changing, something softening. Not forgiveness, not yet. But something real. And for the first time in a long time, Adam felt worthy of the title he had never dared claim, Dad. The morning of the surgery arrived with a gray sky and quiet air, as if the world itself understood the weight of the day. Adam had barely slept the night before, and he could tell Cassie hadn't either. They moved around the kitchen like ghosts, making breakfast no one had the appetite to eat. Chloe sat at the table with her stuffed bear clutched to her chest, her small fingers wrapped tightly around its worn paw. Emma stayed close to her sister, unusually quiet, watching her every move like she might vanish. Cassie tried to smile, offering gentle words of encouragement, but Adam could see the fear hiding behind her calm exterior. He wished he could take it from her, carry it all himself, but all he could do was be there, fully, completely, without distraction. When it was time to leave, he helped Chloe into her little coat, careful to keep his voice steady. She looked up at him with her big brown eyes and whispered, "Will it hurt?" He knelt down beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe a little," he said honestly. "But we're going to be right there when you wake up. And after that, it's going to get better. I promise." The drive to the hospital was quiet, filled only with the soft hum of the engine and the occasional whispered word from the back seat. Cassie held Chloe's hand the whole way. Adam drove with white knuckles, watching the rearview mirror more than the road, checking and rechecking Chloe's expression. Every now and then she caught his eye and gave him a tiny, nervous smile, as if trying to reassure him instead of the other way around. At the hospital, the staff was kind and warm, doing their best to make the sterile environment feel less frightening. Chloe was brave, more than anyone had a right to expect from someone so small. She answered questions calmly, held her bear tightly, and only faltered when the nurse said it was time to say goodbye. Her lower lip trembled, and she turned to Adam and Cassie with wide eyes. "You'll be here when I wake up?" she asked. Adam nodded immediately, taking her hand. "We're not going anywhere." They watched her disappear down the hallway, her bear tucked under her arm, her small form swallowed up by the hospital gown and the large doors. When she was gone, the silence became unbearable. Cassie collapsed into the nearest chair, burying her face in her hands. Adam sat beside her, placing his arm around her shoulders without a word. For the first time since they had reunited, she leaned into him without hesitation. He felt her breath shake, felt her tears soak into his shirt, and held her tighter. Hours passed in a haze of waiting room coffee, brief updates, and unbearable stillness. Adam tried reading emails, scrolling through news, anything to keep his mind from wandering into fear. But nothing helped. Every time the door opened, he jumped, his stomach twisting, his mind bracing for the worst. When the doctor finally walked in, both Adam and Cassie stood at the same time, holding their breath. The surgeon smiled, tired but reassuring. "She did beautifully," he said. "The surgery went well, no complications. She'll be in recovery for a while, but everything looks good." Cassie burst into tears. Adam felt his legs weaken and sat back down, breathing out a relief so deep it made him dizzy. The doctor continued speaking, explaining post-op care, medications, follow-up appointments, but Adam barely heard it. All he could focus on was the fact that she was okay. Later, they were allowed to see her. Chloe looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, her face pale, her breathing slow but steady. Emma stood beside her quietly, holding her sister's hand. Cassie brushed the hair from Chloe's forehead and whispered something Adam couldn't hear. Then Chloe's eyelids fluttered open, and she looked around the room. Her gaze landed on Adam. "You stayed," she said in a hoarse whisper. He stepped forward and smiled. "Of course I did." She gave a weak smile, then added, "Did you bring my bear?" He held it up and placed it gently beside her. "Never let it out of my sight." She nodded, her eyes already closing again, drifting back into sleep with the comfort of knowing she was safe. That night, Adam sat in the hospital chair beside her bed, long after Cassie and Emma had gone home to rest. He watched the monitors blink, listened to the soft beat of her heart, and realized that in the span of just a few days, everything had changed. He was no longer a man defined by boardrooms, deadlines, and corporate conquests. He was a father. And he was never walking away again. Chloe's recovery was slower than anyone had hoped, but it was steady. She spent several days in the hospital, drifting between long naps and quiet moments with books and soft cartoons playing on the television. The nurses adored her, charmed by her quiet strength and sharp wit. Cassie rarely left her side, always hovering with a gentle hand and steady voice, while Adam split his time between work, only what was absolutely necessary, and being in that room, helping in any way he could. He read to Chloe in the mornings, brought her puzzles in the afternoon, and held her hand when the medications made her feel sick or tired. She no longer hesitated to call him Dad. It had slipped out one morning when he had been adjusting her blanket. She had mumbled it sleepily, and he had nearly frozen, his heart catching in his throat. He didn't say anything in the moment, afraid to scare the word away, but it echoed in his chest for the rest of the day like the warmest kind of thunder. Cassie saw it happen too, that slow, undeniable shift. She had once known a man who lived in expensive suits and schedules, whose world was built on control. But the man who now sat beside their daughter's hospital bed in wrinkled clothes and dark-circled eyes, whispering knock-knock jokes and brushing hair out of a little girl's face, he was different. Softer. Truer. She didn't say anything at first, but she watched him closely, trying to reconcile the man he used to be with the one who now reached for her hand when Chloe was taken away for follow-up scans. Emma had struggled the most with the change. She had stayed with a neighbor during the hospital nights and had grown more withdrawn, unsure of her place now that Chloe received all the attention and Adam seemed to orbit around her. One evening, when Adam came home from the hospital to check on her, she wouldn't speak to him. She sat on the floor in her room, silently braiding her doll's hair, refusing to look up. He knelt beside her and waited. After a long time, she whispered, "You're Chloe's dad now." "Not mine." Adam's heart sank. He hadn't expected her to say it, but it made perfect sense. From her eyes, he had chosen Chloe, the girl in the hospital, the one who needed him most. But Emma needed him too, just differently. He looked her in the eyes and said, "I know it feels that way. But I'm yours too. If you want me to be." She blinked at him, not convinced. "But I'm not sick. I don't need help." He took her hand gently. "That doesn't mean you don't matter. I miss just as much time with you. I want to make that up too. Not just with Chloe. With both of you." She looked at him, still unsure. "Then will you come to my school play next week? Even if Chloe still needs you?" He didn't hesitate. "I'll be there in the front row." After that, she began to soften again. She asked him to help her with a drawing, and later, she brought him a picture of a house with 4 people drawn in bright colors. She had labeled them all with careful letters, Mommy, Chloe, Emma, and Daddy. When he saw it, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He simply picked her up and hugged her until she giggled and said he was squeezing too hard. Back at the hospital, Chloe was gaining strength. She had color in her cheeks again and sat up more often, demanding pancakes and asking when she could go home. When the doctors finally approved her discharge, she bounced with excitement in the bed and asked if she could ride home in Adam's car, not Cassie's. He pretended to be shocked. "What? My car isn't full of stickers and cracker crumbs like your mom's." She laughed. "That's why I want to go in yours." Cassie packed their things slowly, watching Adam help Chloe into her shoes. There was something surreal about it. This man who had once vanished from her life was now folding hospital discharge papers, tucking a stuffed bear under his daughter's arm, and memorizing medication schedules like it was the most natural thing in the world. She felt something crack open inside her, something she had boarded up long ago. That night, back home, after the girls were asleep and the house had gone quiet, Cassie and Adam sat together in the living room. She was tired, her head leaning back against the couch, but her eyes were open and steady. "You really stayed," she said quietly. "I meant it," he answered. She turned her face toward him. "I thought I would have to do all of this alone. I prepared for it. But you're here." He reached for her hand, not urgently, but like someone who finally understood how fragile trust could be. "And I'm not leaving." This time, she didn't pull away. She let their fingers interlace. And when she leaned her head on his shoulder, it didn't feel like forgiveness. It felt like beginning again. The weeks that followed felt like a quiet kind of miracle. Chloe's recovery was slow but certain, each day bringing more energy, more laughter, and fewer reminders of how close things had come to the edge. The house was filled again with morning cartoons, mismatched socks, and requests for pancakes at odd hours. The chaos was constant, but so was the joy. Adam adjusted to it with a surprising kind of ease. He wasn't just a visitor anymore. He had learned the rhythm of their mornings, the language of Emma's moods, the different way Chloe smiled when she was proud versus when she was shy. He knew which books they wanted before bed and when Cassie needed a quiet look more than she needed words. There were still moments of awkwardness, little remnants of the time lost between them. Adam sometimes caught himself looking too long at family photos from before his presence, feeling the ache of absence in the space where he should have been. But then Chloe would tug on his sleeve to show him a new drawing, or Emma would slip her hand into his during a walk, and the ache would dissolve into something softer. Cassie had grown quieter too, not distant, but contemplative, like she was slowly unlearning all the ways she had taught herself not to rely on anyone. She had been a fortress for so long, and now there was someone beside her who wasn't trying to break in, but to help her carry the weight of the walls. One Sunday afternoon, the girls set up a pretend restaurant in the living room, complete with menus scribbled on notepads and mismatched dishes from the kitchen. Adam was their only customer, and he sat dutifully at their makeshift table while Chloe served invisible spaghetti and Emma tried to overcharge him for lemonade made of water. Cassie watched from the hallway, smiling, her arms crossed loosely over her chest. When he looked up and caught her eye, something passed between them that hadn't been there before, certainty. Later that evening, after the girls were in bed and the toy dishes had been returned to their shelves, Adam found Cassie standing by the kitchen window, staring out into the yard where moonlight touched the tops of the grass. He approached quietly, not wanting to break the moment. She didn't turn around when she spoke. "I never imagined we'd end up here," she said. "I spent years thinking it would just be me and them. I convinced myself that was enough. That I was enough." Adam stood beside her and looked out at the same view. "You were more than enough," he said. "You saved them. You saved yourself. You built a life for them out of nothing. I'm just trying to be worthy of it now." She turned to him then, eyes full of emotion, but not fear. "You are," she said softly. They didn't speak much more that night, but something between them had shifted again, like the final piece of something long unfinished falling into place. In the weeks that followed, Adam moved in slowly, not with bags or grand gestures, but by presence. A toothbrush left in the bathroom, a jacket hung near the door, a favorite mug that began showing up in the dishwasher. The girls noticed, of course, and when they asked if Daddy was staying forever, Cassie only smiled and looked at Adam. He answered for them. Yes. If you'll have me. Their life didn't suddenly become perfect. There were still long nights, unexpected fevers, forgotten lunches, and moments when the past tried to sneak in through the cracks. But there was also laughter, warmth, and the kind of love that doesn't shout, but anchors everything. On a quiet evening, months after Chloe's surgery, the four of them sat on the porch watching the sunset. Emma curled up in Adam's lap, Chloe beside Cassie, their hands linked. There were no big declarations, no dramatic revelations, just peace. The kind that had once seemed impossible. Adam looked at them, these three people who had once been strangers and now were his whole world, and realized that everything he had ever chased had brought him here. To this porch. To this family. To this beginning. In my opinion, the ending of this story is both deeply satisfying and emotionally earned. What began as a chance encounter rooted in regret and the pain of the unknown gradually unfolded into a journey of healing, trust, and rediscovery. Adam's transformation from a distant, driven businessman into a present, compassionate father is a reminder that it's never too late to step into the role life always meant for you. Cassie's quiet resilience and willingness to open the door again to someone who once let her down shows immense strength and grace. And the girls, through their innocence and love, become the bridge that reconnects two people who once lost each other. This isn't just a love story, it's a redemption arc wrapped in family, honesty, and second chances. And sometimes, those are the most powerful stories of all.